So could we start with the prayers, Stephen? Thank you.
Praise to Shakyamuni Buddha. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all three ever devout homage, to all worthy of respect, bowing with bodies as many as all realms atoms in all aspects, the supreme faith I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions. Perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a visual aberration, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew, or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud. See conditioned things as such. Through these merits, may sentient beings attain the rank of all-seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. The heart of the perfection of wisdom sutra. I prostrate to the Arya triple gem. Thus did I hear at one time the Bhagawan was dwelling on Massive Vulture's mountain in Rajagriha, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagawan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then through the power of Buddha, the venerable Shariputra said this to the bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara. How should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara said this to the venerable Sharadvatiputra. Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty. Emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind. No visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There is no I element, and so on, up to and including no mind element and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to and including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the end point of nirvana, All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly, completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared. Tayata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhi Soha. Shariputra, the bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage. It is like that. It is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom, just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagavan, having thus spoken, the Venerable Sharadvati Putra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara, and those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagavan. Short mandala offering. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niryataya. Taking refuge and generating bodhicitta, once in Tibetan and twice in English. Sangye chodong soki chognam la, jantu bardu dani kyapsuchi, dagi chunyen gi pesunam gi, rola penshir sangye druparshok. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings.
So I'd like to welcome everyone here. This is our penultimate class. And I've spent a lot of, not effort's not the right word, I've been absorbed in the extremely exciting and challenging task of presenting Ultimate Bodhicitta in 2 sessions, whilst also covering the remaining significant number of verses of the text. And after pursuing that for a while, I realized that I was needing to step back and create a kind of an overview in order to then be in a position to unravel the finer points and details of the stanzas. So my approach today has been very, very carefully assembled from thoughts and passages that have meant an enormous amount to me personally over many years of studying. And I'm not claiming to be a great scholar or anything, but this was a topic, emptiness is a topic that the moment I heard it, grabbed my attention, it galvanized my attention. And I have pursued it in every possible way over those years. And I spent a lot of time with the precious texts in order to enhance any little understanding I might have garnered. So I'm going to present on that basis and ask you to come along for the ride. I don't mean that in a trivial way, just to relax really, and just consider the points that have been raised and let them sit and even dwell in your mind when the session finishes. And then I feel that through doing that today, presenting this way today, although I do cover some of the verses, I'll be in a position next week to finish the text just by pinpointing a few points and then spending some time in the dedication. Of course, that's very auspicious to have assembled the causes to complete the text in this way. And for reasons of auspiciousness, I'll also start a commentary on the first or two lines of the text and then stop, because this is a rather wonderful aspect of the Tibetan tradition, that when a teacher is teaching a text, they don't just stop at the end of the text, they begin the commentary again in order to leave the door open for both the teacher and the students to spend more time together in the future. So I think this is a very beautiful and meaningful thing. So I'll attempt that as well. So I'm going to begin with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and the topic or the point that is being focused upon is the crucial need to identify the object of negation. His Holiness says, concerning the improvement of the mind, in order to ascertain the meaning of selflessness or emptiness, it is necessary to first ascertain the meaning of just what a phenomena is empty of when one refers to emptiness. The Bodhisattva Shantideva says in his Guide to a Bodhisattva's Way of Life, quote, without identifying the object to be investigated, its non-existence cannot be apprehended. So His Holiness glosses, he says, just so, without ascertaining that of which a phenomena is empty, the object of negation, an understanding of emptiness does not develop. So the question of what is it that phenomena are empty? And the answer, and these are the words of His Holiness from this very beautiful text, which I've posted, by the way, the second part, which is what I'm referring to here, the key of the middle way. This passage is from this text, and for your convenience and delight, I've posted that on the Google Drive for you. It's incredibly concise and a powerful coverage of this topic. So His Holiness says, answer, since a rainbow is empty of anything tangible, we may speak of an empty rainbow, but this type of negation is not what we have in mind. Similarly, though we can speak of empty space, since space is empty of anything physical, this too is not an example of what we mean. Rather, when we speak of a phenomena as being empty, we are referring to its being empty, of being established by way of its own entity. In other words, we're referring to a mode of existence of a thing, which is its emptiness. His Holiness continues, further, it is not that the object of negation formerly existed, but is then eliminated later, like a forest which existed today and was burnt by fire. Sorry, it existed yesterday, it was burnt by fire today, with the result that the forest is now, the mountain is now empty of a forest. This kind of evacuation of another existent thing is not what's meant here by emptiness. And the reason for that is that emptiness as a thing, inherent existence as a thing doesn't exist whatsoever. So we're refuting the appearance to delusion of a non-existent thing as existing really. This is critical. And it's actually a point that a lot of Western academic scholars don't grasp in their presentations. And they often end up talking about Nagarjuna's great reasonings in his Mula Madhyamika Karika as somehow referring to the fact that all reality is simply linguistic signs. This is not what's meant at all. So His Holiness stresses this point. He says, rather, this is an object of negation that since beginningless time has been empty and has never been known to exist. And he gives further examples. Also, with respect to the way in which a phenomena is empty of the object of negation, it is not like a table top being empty of flowers. There, the object of negation, flowers, is an entity separate from the base of negation. Thus, it can be taken away from the tabletop. With the object of negation being inherent existence, however, we are not negating an entity separate from the base of negation, which in this example is the table. But rather we're negating a mode of existence of the base of the negation itself. Therefore, without ascertaining just what the object of negation is, of which phenomena are empty, that is, without ascertaining the measure of what self is in the theory of selflessness, we cannot understand the meaning of emptiness. And then the crunch is, quote, a mere vacuity without any sense of the object of negation is this and is not that, is utterly not the meaning of an emptiness. And so this idea that an emptiness is somehow a sheer vacuity of being anything at all is not what's meant here, because that's simply an ordinary emptiness. Emptiness has this, a realization of emptiness has this dynamic aspect of directly opposing the false appearance, which is the object of negation appearing as the essential nature of the entity being perceived. So this leads us to the need or requirement to have a concise definition of what's referred to as the hypothetical measure of true existence. And this term is very useful. Why are we saying hypothetical? We're saying hypothetical because we can't measure the proportions of a non-existent thing, can we? Because it doesn't have any existence. Inherent existence doesn't have any existence, any proportion that we can measure. But hypothetically, if it did, then it would have to have certain characteristics. This is really, really critical to our understanding. So Tsongkhapa, in illuminating the intent, and I've referred to this book a number of times, it's absolutely revered, oh, sorry, the wrong one, absolutely revered, and not wrong one in that sense, but it's the wrong wisdom publication. This text is absolutely unbelievably precious. So in that text, Tsongkhapa says, thus, the purported reality of phenomena, not dependent on some other factor, namely the convention-making, conceptualizing subject, an intrinsic nature supposedly not posited through such conceptualization, is what is called self-existence. And that is the object of negation. So I'll read that again. Thus, the purported reality, so it has to be purported because it's not the way the object actually is, it's been asserted that way by ignorance. The purported reality of phenomena, not dependent upon some other factor, namely the convention-making, conceptualizing subject, an intrinsic nature supposedly not posited through such conceptualization is what is called self-existence. And this is the object of negation. And so Tsongkhapa then moves on to say that this absence, the absence of this can be talked about in relation to a person and to things other than persons. So we have a selflessness of persons and a selflessness of phenomena. In the unique presentation of Prasangika, the subtle selflessness that's apprehended by the wisdom realizing emptiness has the same object. There's not a different emptiness in relation to those two spheres of phenomena. It's simply that the base upon which the emptiness is predicated, if you like, is different. So there's a very, very famous passage from the commentary of Aryadeva's 400 stanzas, which really encapsulates what's just been said. Here, what is referred to us as a self, and that's the inverted commas, is that intrinsic nature, namely the nature of things conceived of as not dependent on others. And the absence of this is selflessness. Because of the twofold distinctions of person phenomena, this selflessness is understood in terms of two kinds, the selfless of phenomena and the selfless of persons. So thus, it is the nature of things conceived by us in this example of as not dependent upon others. So this is absolutely critical to keep in mind. So if we pursue the implications of this description of the hypothetical degree of true existence, we'll have possibly a doubt arise. And this doubt came up historically over many centuries. In fact, it continues to come up. And it's the doubt that if things don't exist inherently, they can't exist at all. They can't function. And so even as if we've studied tenets, we'll know that even Svatantrika Madhyamika are going to say that there's some aspect of the phenomena from the side of the base which exists as a kind of reason for drawing a particular designation to it. And so for them, our conventionally existent phenomena is a combination of both some degree of inherent existence together with an imputing mind. Prasangika, the higher school, is going to say that there is nothing from the side of the object that exists, and that objects exist merely as conceptual imputation. So this is a critical point. So anyway, the doubt arises, and I'm quoting now from Tsongkhapa's commentary, which has been translated as Ocean of Reasoning, which is a commentary on Nagarjuna's Mula Madhyamika Karika. The doubt. If all of these internal and external phenomena were empty of essential existence, it would follow that not the slightest thing could come into being, arise, or pass away. Therefore, it would not make any sense to maintain that one could achieve liberation by successively achieving the two nirvanas through abandonment, that is, abandoning the afflictions, and through the cessation of the appropriation of the aggregates. This is because the aggregates and the afflictions would not exist essentially. Thus, they say, things must exist essentially. So the reply to this, and this reply is the Prasangika reply. Suppose all of the internal and external phenomena were not empty of essential existence. You can see here that Tsongkhapa's pivoting the whole situation around to turn it back on the opponent. Suppose all of the internal and external phenomena were not empty of essential existence. For something that exists essentially, it is impossible for it to arise anew, having been non-existent previously, and it is impossible for it to cease anew, having been previously existent. Therefore, it would not make any sense to maintain that nirvana arises from the abandonment of the afflictions and the cessation of the aggregates. This is because, and this is the crunch, essentially existent afflictions and aggregates could not be eliminated because such essence is immutable. So this is a hypothetical construction here that if things exist in the way that they're purported to be by ignorance, they'll be absolutely immaculately immutable. Why? Because they have no relationship, can have no relationship to any other thing. So the whole network, inter-network, if you like, of dependent arisings could not function and reply and respond to one another, if you like. There could be no functionality. There could be no experience. There could be no sense perception, etc., etc. So I wanted to take here a personal example, which I raised the other week. And because I live near a railway line, and I want to just raise the proposition following on from this passage by Tsongkhapa that if the sound of the train passing existed inherently, it couldn't be heard. This is because it would exist without depending on other conditions, such as causes and conditions. So just for the sake of examining this more clearly, we can talk about the sound of a train to me, sitting here next to the railway line, in terms of a beginning, a middle, and an end of that sound. So as a train approaches, I hear the beginning of the sound. Then as the train is in closest proximity, I hear the duration of the sound. It may be louder, of course. And then as the train departs further down the railway track, I hear the diminution, the disappearance of the sound. So if you look at it like here, I'm just for the sake of this argument, I'm going to say that sound that I experience is made up of three parts, beginning, middle, and end, and they are connected as a continuum or a duration. So we hear the beginning, middle, and end of the sound of the train passing only in the relation of the moving train, there's one going past now, to our own local position. This means they are not interdependent. We can't subtract one of those elements and still have the other. Somehow the sound of the train left over if we take those two things away completely. From this perspective, the sound which we do hear pertaining to a causally unfolding continuum, namely beginning, middle, and end, is experienced only because it is interdependently established in relationship to the connection of our ear to the moving object as it approaches and departs, while generating a noise that is experienced differently according to the distance between the train and our ear. Now, this is sort of following the same sort of logic we had before. If sound existed from its own side, if this sound existed from its own side, the sound that I've just described, it couldn't approach and depart. Not just from us, or indeed any other person or thing. Say a person living next door or further down the railway line. Therefore, how could this sound have parts from its own side in the form of early, middle, and later portions? How could some such parts come to be, embedded as it were, in an otherwise immutable sound entity? How could sound appear, dwell for some time in our awareness, and then fade away so that we could no longer hear the sound of the train? Or if sound did somehow inherently possess the three parts, which I've been describing, arising, having duration, and fading, as already always existing components of its own nature. And don't forget here that if it exists inherently, it can't sometimes have these qualities and sometimes not, because they wouldn't be inherent. It has to always already be endowed with these three qualities if it exists in that way. This would mean that these three things, beginning, middle, and end, would have to exist simultaneously. In that entity, as otherwise it could not be inherently existent because it would be having some of its qualities missing depending on other circumstances. And it can't have that because there's no relation to any other thing. And thus it would follow that if we could, and this is hypothetical, if we could somehow hear that sound, the beginning and middle and end of that sound would have to appear to us all at once, simultaneously. Because this is the nature of the sound. A sound that's inherently existent can't hold back some portion of its presentation, especially in relation to reading its environment and saying, oh, there's a Ross over there, I'll now send him the beginning of my sound. And then I'll send him the middle, and then I'll send him the end of my sound. And then when he puts the three together, he'll have heard me. This is nonsensical if sound's inherently existent. So if something such as this sound is inherently existent, it can't change its aspect from moment to moment in dependence on factors other than itself. This takes us back to the definition of the object of negation. And I'm going to just rework here Gyalp Subje's commentary on the lack of inherent existence of the senses and sense objects. He says, it follows that direct perception of sound, which exists by way of its own entity, is not feasible. If it were, the awareness perceiving the oral form of sound should perceive all its parts, i.e. its beginning, middle, and end in my example, all at once, because that sound is a total inherent entity. He goes on, yet when sound consciousness perceives the sound's form, it does not in fact perceive every single part of the sound. Who that knows the reality of things would claim that the sound is directly perceivable? This is absolutely fascinating to explore, because if this clock existed inherently, it would have to present its entirety to me. But when I look at the clock, I only see the face and a little bit of the side because of the position of my eye consciousness due to its location in a physical body, acting as a perspectival machine, perceiving only a portion of the angle or view of a complete object, don't I? And in dependence on seeing that portion, I get enough information to impute clock. And to all extents and purposes, that's the clock. No problems whatsoever from a Prasangika point of view. The problem is that if the clock existed from its own side, in and of itself, self-supporting from where it appears to be, covering its base of designation, which is a collection of all these parts, the entire clock would appear to me in one cognitive act, which is impossible because we don't see like that. So that's exactly the same kind of analysis that we've just performed on sound. And so the invitation here, I'm just really giving an example. It's not that I'm terribly, I love sound. I love music, for example. I listen to a lot of sound. And we listen to a lot of sound when we're listening and having dialogue, of course. So sound can be very meaningful, but it's a very, very interesting analysis, isn't it? Because if sound was inherently meaningful, if words were inherently meaningful, then there'd be absolutely no need to learn a language. I could just mention some Italian or German word, and you'd spontaneously recognize it and its meaning if it existed from its own side. So to follow a little bit further, going back to sound, In other words, if sound existed inherently, we would not be positioned to hear first the beginning of the sound and then the middle and then the end of the sound, as we experientially do. But it is nonsensical, isn't it, to assert that sound in which there is no temporal sequence across space-time, such a sound. There's no sense in talking of the existence of such a sound, which would necessarily be the case if sound existed from its own side. Put bluntly, an inherently existent sound couldn't work as a sound, and as such, absurdly, it couldn't be heard. What then would be the point of calling it a sound, let alone one that carries its own inherent nature? So speaking now in ordinary, everyday, conventional terms, we know from ordinary non-philosophical experience that sound does not appear all at once as a singular totality, with all its parts immediately apparent to our oral sense. If it did, how could we ever listen to it? Our experience of music would have no beginning, middle, and end, would hear the entire composition simultaneously. The crucial question swings on logic. How can we speak of the hearing of the beginning, middle, and end of sound all at the same time? Because this would require, wouldn't it, that I hear this train outside my window arriving and departing the open arena of my awareness, and in the same moment, which is blatantly absurd. The fact is that when I first label sound, hearing, to the initial eruption of the base of designation sound sufficiently appearing to my ear consciousness, I label beginning. I'm hearing sound. And then as it continues, I'm hearing the continuation of sound. And as it disappears, I'm hearing the disappearance of sound. At no stage in those moments has there been an inherently existent sound with beginning, middle, and end presenting itself to me. Such a sound does not exist whatsoever. It is totally empty of existing in that way. So if sound, I'm really pushing the points, if sound existed as an intact entity from its own side, and thus with all its features or aspects already complete, then how would we first hear the sound, experience it as the loudest when closest, and then finally be aware of its fading as the train forges its way along to the next station? All of these things are dependent on the proximity and distance, and an inherently existent sound could not partake of either. An inherently existent sound cannot sometimes be proximate to me and sometimes be distant. So how could it sometimes be louder and how sometimes could it be softer? How could it be coming and sometimes be going? It couldn't. In summary, inherently existent sound, if such a thing was possible, would hang in the air continuously, eternally embalmed in its own nature. And thus it would eternally make its own sound, irrespective of whether there was a train as a mechanical instrument to make a noise and an ear to hear it, and irrespective of distance and proximity. So we end up with this kind of fossilized train sound experience floating as an entity without any relation to anything else somehow in the universe. But we know from my description here and from our own investigation that the sound that I'm talking about is the one that I experience according to this network of proximities and relationships. How is the sound dwelling in space out there bearing those characteristics that have been predicated precisely on the interdependent relationship that I have with an open window to the sound of a train passing outside. If this sound existed inherently, anyone would hear it as I've just heard it here, wouldn't they? So if I close the window, it'd be softer. Everyone would hear the softer sound without having to close or open a window, because that would be its nature from its own side. So an inherently existent sound could never come to an end. It would always be making the exact same sound, irrespective of whether it was heard or unheard. Even if there was no train, even if there was no track, even if there was no Ross with an open ear, even if there was no open window. Why? Because it would be immutable. It would be in a state of perpetual stasis, and thus could in no way whatsoever function as a dependent arising under any conditions or circumstances. So the conclusion is, when all the conditions for sound are assembled, sound can be produced and heard. Merely imputed sound can exist and function precisely because, and only because, it is merely imputed by name and conception. Gyaltsabje says, for instance, in dependence upon the strings and wood and the hand's effort, through these three together, sound is produced and issues from the instruments like the veena or the flute. The veena is, I think, a lute. When the wise investigate and think, from where has it come and where has it gone, searching, as we've just been trying to do my own way here, searching in the main and intermediate directions, they find no coming and no going of sound. Likewise, and I might ask John here to show us verse 112 in the Burzen translation. So we've jumped a number of verses here for the sake of this illustration. 112. Thank you. When musicians are playing a beautiful melody, should we examine the sound they are making, we would see that it does not exist by itself. But when we are not making any formal analysis, still there is a beautiful tune to be heard, which is merely a label on notes and on players. That's why lovely music can lighten sad hearts. Very beautiful stanza. So you can go back to me if you like, John. So another scriptural reference here is again from Tsongkhapa's Ocean of Reasoning, and it's a sutra quote, and it says, whatever pleasant sound occurs never penetrates inside, nor is the ear seen going towards it. Sound appears only out of conceptual thought. Neither does the object come to the sense faculty, nor does the sense faculty go to the object. Instead, the experience of the object by the sense faculty is shown to be merely conceptually posited. The sound of song, music, and dance are not to be grasped. Dreamlike objects are causes of desire for unwise fools. The unwise who are obsessed and conceptualize ruin themselves. They conceptualize inherent existence. They ruin themselves. Am I going to be like the childish beings who are slaves of afflictive emotions? Question mark. A very big rhetorical question, isn't it? Are we going to be like that ourselves? So you'll recall Tsongkhapa's conclusion in the form of the hypothetical debate that I quoted before, and I quote it again for our convenience. Suppose all the internal and external phenomena were not empty of essential existence. For something that exists essentially, it is impossible for it to arise anew without having been non-existent previously, and it is impossible for it to cease anew, having been previously existent. Therefore, it would not make any sense to maintain that nirvana arises from the abandonment of the afflictions and the cessation of the aggregates. This is because essentially existent afflictions and aggregates could not be eliminated because such essence is immutable. So to just give a little bit of a commentary on that, the point here is that enlightenment is possible only because samsara and nirvana lack inherent existence, just as do suffering mother sentient beings and indeed do Buddhas. So this realization that all phenomena lack inherent existence has incredibly poignant bearing on love and compassion, the generation of love and compassion of a bodhisattva. And in fact, it leads us towards the deepest and most profound and subtle form of great compassion, which is called compassion observing the unapprehendable. Tsongkhapa says in Illuminating the Intent, and again, this is a beautiful poetic passage. Now, in an utterly clear pool, shimmering with ripples caused by a breeze, reflections of the moon appear. And as one sees the rise and fall of these reflections, together with its basis, water, as if seeing the moon itself in the water, the wise ones, that is, those who are versed in understanding this nature, will perceive on a moment-by-moment basis these reflections to be transient and devoid of the reality of being the moon that they appear to be. Just like this example, this is Tsongkhapa continuing, under the power of compassion, when they see other sentient beings, beings who reside in the ocean of the identity view, this is referring to the view of the self of our own person, if you like, as inherently existent. Those who reside in the ocean of the identity view, an ocean into which flow the vast blue lakes of ignorance, replenishing it, an ocean that is being beaten up by storms of false mental projections. When they see such things before them, beings who appear like reflections of their own positive and negative karma, and upon whom befalls the suffering of conditioned existence, of moment-by-moment disintegration, and see these beings as devoid of intrinsic existence. I've got that in bold in my notes. They see them as devoid of intrinsic existence. Great compassion for them arises. So the point here is that great compassion and the realization that all things are void of true existence can go hand in hand. The critical point is that it's impossible to see how and why sentient beings suffer and how they might be freed of such suffering without realizing how both persons and things other than persons lack inherent existence. In other words, if I was an afflicted human being with this body, it's my essential body nature, I couldn't be reborn. I couldn't be affected by circumstances. I couldn't be modified according to karma, etc., etc. I couldn't possibly evolve into an enlightened state. I would be embalmed in a perpetual immutability with the same sort of horrific stasis as that inherent existence sound that I described. There'd be no path, no dharma, no words that could be spoken, anything. It all completely collapses if we look at things as existing inherently. So the reason why this is a source of great compassion is therefore beings suffer, and they suffer intolerably. We have to consider the fate of situation of people in the Ukraine at the moment, precisely because of a cause which is avoidable. This is the source of a bodhisattva's great compassion. Beings are suffering because they have not generated the correct view of reality. Therefore, in real terms, they're suffering due to a mistake that can be rectified. And so this is pitiful, absolutely pitiful. I don't mean that in a trivial way. It's a profound source of concern for the bodhisattva. So this form of compassion is very, very powerful. So I thought here to do the Tonlin meditation again, and I'll recite it 3 times in English, but just while doing this, feel that you're taking on all the suffering of all sentient beings and giving them all the conditions for full enlightenment. And you can do this because all of these elements are lacking inherent existence. But you can also feel more particularly because of the nature of this topic that you're taking on all their ignorant self-grasping and replacing it with a pure wisdom, realizing the true nature or ultimate nature of things. So we'll just spend a moment composing our motivation. And thus, O venerable compassionate gurus, we seek your blessings that all karmic debts, obstacles and sufferings of all mother sentient beings may, without exception, ripen upon us right now, and that we may give our happiness and virtues to others, and thereby invest all beings in bliss. And thus, O venerable compassionate gurus, we seek your blessings that all karmic debts, obstacles and sufferings of all mother sentient beings may, without exception, ripen upon us right now, and that we may give over our happiness and virtues to others, and thereby invest all beings in bliss. And thus, O venerable compassionate gurus, we seek your blessings that all karmic debts, obstacles and sufferings of all mother sentient beings may, without exception, ripen upon us right now, and that we may give over our happiness and virtues to others, and thereby invest all beings in bliss. So we're now going to return to the root verses, and I'm going to ask to go to the Venerable Jones translation and 102. Thanks. There we go. Yeah. Also at that time, may all the migratory beings of the high states fully meditate on selflessness, just like us, and then, free from conceptualization, recognize existence and peace as being equal. So this verse again is in the form of a great bodhisattva prayer made by Dharmarakshita. He's calling on Yamantaka to grant this situation. Whereas the last verse, 101, prayed, quote, may all the beings in bad migrations attain clairvoyance and the Dharanis, and then take the body of a god or human, and on that favourite basis generate the mind of enlightenment. The prayer now extends to consideration of those fortunate beings already reborn in the higher realms. And so the point here is that if you've created the karmic causes, such as generosity and so forth, to be reborn in the higher realms, that in itself is no protection from falling into the lower realms at a future time. So it will only be, that situation will only be cut if we can generate the wisdom realizing emptiness and perform actions on that basis. So the recognition of existence and peace as being equal refers to the fact that bodhisattvas endowed with the wisdom realizing emptiness see all things, whether pleasant or unpleasant, desirable or undesirable, to exist in the same selfless way. In other words, because things depend on other phenomena and other conditions for their existence, they do not exist from their own side. Thus, if sentient beings could realize emptiness, they would be freed from the conceptualization of inherent or true existence. This in turn would give them the power to transcend all unhealthy views and afflictive emotions. Why? Because the error, this fundamental, I think at one point Jimpo refers to it as an epistemological error. It's an error regarding the way that we know things. This epistemological error would be utterly eradicated. Nagarjuna says, quote, "The apprehension of inherent existence is the cause of all unhealthy views. Afflictive emotions are not produced without this error. Therefore, when emptiness is thoroughly known, unhealthy views and afflictive emotions are thoroughly purified." Then Nagarjuna asks, through what is emptiness known? And replies, it is known through seeing dependent arising. Buddha, the supreme knower of reality, said, what is dependently produced is not inherently produced. These are mutually exclusive contradictories. Things are either dependently arisen or they're not dependently arisen. There's no third position. We have a dichotomy here, and we have to come down on one side or the other to work on this situation. So this is why I think this topic is playful in a really interesting way. I hope I've used that word appropriately. One day when Lama Zopa Rinpoche was in Melbourne, we'd gone to the airport for him to leave for another part of his tour. And as we were walking through the horrific banality of the aisles of Tullamarine Airport, which is Melbourne's biggest airport, we all know that unique blandness that airports have. Lama Zopa Rinpoche said, meditate on everything that is appearing as not existing from its own side, and then continued to walk down the aisle. This was an instruction that he gave to me on the side as I was walking with him and other people to the departure lounge. So Lama's over here is asking us to be doing these analyses, not just in our meditational sitting, but in the very daily intercourse of our experience of daily life. This is when it really matters, it really counts. So His Holiness glosses these two verses of Nagarjuna I just quoted. He says, dependent arising refers to the fact that all impermanent phenomena, whether physical, mental, or otherwise, come into existence dependent upon certain causes and conditions. Whatever arises dependent on certain causes and conditions is not exclusively operating under its own power. Therefore, sentient beings, by knowing emptiness, by thoroughly seeing dependent arising, can go beyond unhealthy views and cut all afflictive emotions from their root, and thereby obtain liberation and nirvana. So I just want to raise another point here. As Tsongkhapa indicates, quote, the fact of being devoid of inherent existence or devoid of existence through inherent characteristics is not something constructed by scripture or reasoning. They remain so as primordially pure. This gets back to that first passage that I quoted from His Holiness about the rainbow being empty of the rainbow. When we realize the emptiness of something, we're not importing a new quality to that object. We're merely seeing for the first time the actual mode of existence of that thing. It has always existed in that way, and into the future as well, if the cause and conditions for its existence continue. So if this is the primordial way in which things exist, we need to contrast it with the way we normally view things. So I'd like to quote Gendoga here. Gendoga says, normally we view things without any understanding of the mind and of how we perceive things deep within our consciousness. If we look closely, the way we view things is usually affected by some sort of ignorance. Deep down, we view things as having some sort of inherent self-existence. For example, when we generate desire, we perceive something as being inherently appealing and beautiful. Similarly, when we generate hatred or anger, we perceive something as inherently being unpleasant and undesirable. However, the qualities and beauty of the desirable object and the unpleasant qualities of the undesirable object, for which we have such overwhelming and intense desire or hatred, are merely projections or exaggerations of our own mind. Due to the deep-seated ignorance within us, our minds are prone to fabricating the nature of reality. Whatever object we perceive, even if it is only mildly attractive, our mind can see that object as totally beautiful from every aspect. It looks appealing and attractive. Thus, our desire becomes intense and overwhelming. So it's because we're working on the basis that these objects of our attraction, in this case, are inherently existent, we compile up a whole system of increasing exaggerations, and they appear to stick to there where the object's appearing, and then present to us as a fully accomplished fact of the reality of that thing. And that is why we desire it so irresistibly, because we believe that that object actually has those characteristics and qualities. Whereas in reality, we've merely projected them in dependence on grasping at that object as being inherently existent. So if we investigate where desire and hatred come from, we can see that it's derived from our own wrong view, all our misconceptions about the nature of the perceived thing. And then Geshe Doga finishes this section. He says, our mind perceives the object as if it exists independently, and it doesn't depend on any other causes and conditions. If it is pleasant or desirable, we perceive that object as being inherently desirable, rather than its desirability having something to do with our own individual perspective. In reality, the object does not exist in the way we perceive it to exist. So the conclusion, this misconception about the way things exist is the ultimate cause that gives rise to all our wrong ways of seeing things, all the thoughts that continually superimpose a mistaken view on the way things really are. So you might think, yes, okay, I've got that on a theoretical level. I can sort of understand what's being said, but how does it sort of function cognitively? Is there an example we can give that shows our mind's capacity to project and then read something back as existing right there in and of itself, independently of our mind projecting it? This is a fantastic question to raise. Can we come up with an example? And indeed we can. And the example is given in many of the texts, but it's particularly elaborated in Lama Tsongkhapa's various texts. And it's the famous example of the snake in the grass. Now, I'm presenting this in terms of its cognitive dimensions. We see a coiled object, slender, thin object, say a hose, garden hose, half submerged in the gloom of early evening and largely covered by clumps of grass. And we're not looking particularly, we're just walking. And suddenly we look down and go, snake! At that moment, a snake, I think I've done my voice. A snake appears from there. And so real is that moment. I did that instinctive body reaction because that's exactly what we do. We kick in at a primordial level to protect ourselves from that snake out there in the grass. It's totally real. Then we walk on a little bit or run on a little bit and look back. And because our angle's different, the perspective's different, we suddenly see not a snake, but a hose. What's happened to the snake that we formerly saw right there? We realize that it doesn't exist at all there. So this shows our mind's capacity to project inherent existence onto non-inherently existent things and then to grasp at them as existing in that way. It is an incredibly powerful example. And it's one that Kabje Zopa Rinpoche often uses as well. And he elaborates it sideways by picking other examples, such as you're going to bed in a Airbnb holiday venue next to the beach, and you're half asleep and you look and you go, oh, spider! And a certain configuration of a wall hanging shadow cast onto the wall is a sufficient base for you to project spider. So it's exactly the same example. There's no spider there. Now, the amazing part of this analogy is that just as there is no snake on the rope, Tsongkhapa points out that neither is there a snake on the base of designation of snake. This is really a critical step. In both those cases, snake is being merely conceptualized and put out there by our mind. Now, you're going to argue, of course, that there is a difference between those two situations, and there is. So, or you can come back to that in a minute, but I'd like to give a few more examples. So this idea of things existing as a mere conceptual imputation to over there, which we've just described in relation to projecting the snake onto the rope, can be used in endless examples. And so Lama Zopa Rinpoche often gives the example of the letter A of the alphabet. And he says, where is the A that's appearing from there? And so we look for the A. Is it this bar? No, that bar's not an A. If we take that bar and put it over there and then someone sees it, they don't go, oh, that's the bar from the side compositional structure of the letter A. We'll put it back with the rest of the letter, do they? They simply see a bar. It's not even a bar on an angle unless you're on a certain position to it in relation to your own body. So even its angle isn't inherently existent there. So take that away. That's not the A. Take the other side away because exactly the same analysis applies. And then we've got the middle bridge on its own. It becomes a hyphen. That's not an A. It's a hyphen. It's a bar. If we can't find the A inherently in any of those three components, it can't be found in their combination. Because something that is inherently existent in the parts can't suddenly be existent, indwelling or pervading all the parts when assembled. It's absolutely impossible. So there is no A there from the side of the mark. Because we've learnt that that mark is going to, in the case of a language, is going to signify a certain quality or quantity, if you like, which we're calling, in this case, the letter A, which is a member of an alphabet, which is also merely imputed. There's no reason why I've got 26 letters only in an alphabet. We've decided that's going to be the way, and it works. But it's not inherently the case that a word has to have 26, be composed of any of 26 letters and so forth. And so you can apply this to the letter A. You can apply it to Ross. If Ross existed inherently, I would have popped out of the womb of my mother and people would have gone, Ross, spontaneously. But they didn't. They say, Val, what's the boy's name? Oh, we're still trying to decide, but we think we might call him Ross. So we can take the example of a vase, exactly the same, and we can take the example of drapung. Yes, very famous example. And we find this in Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand. And this is an example that I've come back to over and over and over again, because it incredibly vividly captures the way or means of identifying the object of negation. So Pabonka says, I'll read the full text because he's actually looking at the I not existing inherently. So he says, now look, I'll take a couple of steps back, so I have jumped. His Holiness says, just as the car exists in dependence on its parts, such as wheels, axles, and so forth, so a sentient being is conventionally set up in dependence on mind and body. There is no person to be found, either separate from body and mind or within the body and mind. So we can apply the letter A analysis here. This is the reason why the I and all other phenomena are described in Buddhism as name only. The meaning of this is not that the I and all other phenomena are just words, since the words for these phenomena do indeed refer to an actual referent, an actual object. Rather, these phenomena do not exist in and of themselves. The term name only eliminates the possibility that they are established from the object's own side. We need to remember this because the I and other phenomena do not exist as they appear. Quite the contrary. So Tsongkhapa extends the analogy of the snake to the person. This is a bit I had to catch up with. For instance, when a rope that looks like a snake because of its multicolored pattern and its manner and the manner in which it's coiled is encountered in a poorly lit area, the thought, this is a snake, may arise. At that moment, there is not the slightest objective basis on the part of the rope, either in the aggregates or in its parts, that can be identified as the snake. Therefore, this snake is a mere conceptual imputation. This is the crunch. Similarly, when the thought, I am, arises in dependence on the aggregates, and they have to be these aggregates, not your aggregates. Don't forget, I gave this example earlier. Whether, similarly, when the thought I am arises in dependence upon the aggregates, there is not even the slightest basis on the part of the aggregates, whether as a collection of earlier and later continua or as a collection of simultaneous factors and parts, that can be posited as an instance of this I. For this reason, and because there is not even a slightest entity that is distinct from the aggregates, whether in terms of their parts or their bearer, that can be taken to be the basis of this I, so this I is posited through mere conception in dependence upon the aggregates. It has no existence in its own right. Yet, it does not appear to be posited through the mere conception independence on the aggregates, as Lama Tsongkhapa puts it. Indeed, it appears to have an existence in its own right. So this reveals what we were referring to before as the hypothetical measure or degree of true existence. And I'm just going to quote now from Zhang Yangshiba, its great exposition of tenets. He says, the apprehension of existence not posited through the force of nominal conventions, which was described earlier, is the innate apprehension of true establishment, ultimate establishment, and establishment by way of the object's own reality. The conceived object apprehended by that consciousness is the hypothetical measure of true establishment. So we're now moving to Pabonka's example of Draipunga caught up. He says, in the process, while you're looking into exactly how the I appears to your instinctive grasping at a self, the I may present itself in various ways. Sometimes the I may seem like something imputed on the body, and at other times on the mind. This is not the genuine way the I presents itself to the instinctive grasping of the I. This is because the mind and body, which are the basis of imputation I, the imputed phenomena, all merge into one undifferentiated set. Now, this is really critical, and this is why I found this passage so incredibly important, to me at least, not just me, but I mean, in terms of my own experience, because it is evoking the experiential discovery of the object of negation of the I in meditational investigation. And so if we're looking for an I that seems to set itself up standing there separately from the body and mind, then that's not the object of negation. If we're looking for it absorbed into the body and mind, and somehow not appearing as an I, that is not the object of negation. It's an experience of the I mixed undifferentiatedly with the body and mind that is the object of negation. And this is a point that's misunderstood so often, I find, in Western students approaching this topic, because they're looking for something hard and tangible, if you like, that's somehow erected like a skyscraper somewhere, and you're going to come upon and go, oh, that's the object of negation. It's a much more subtle process than that. And so the self-evident I, this is Pabonka, plainly appears to not just be some name imputed to this set, the body and mind. It appears instead to be something established as being self-sufficient. If the I seems to be like this, you have rightly perceived the way the object to be refuted appears to you. Once recognized, it is easy to refute. The key point is a subtle one. This is Pabonka. Sometimes the mistake is in taking it too far and at other times not taking it far enough. If you do not identify the object of refutation, it will always present itself to you. When you try to identify it, it remains hidden among the set of mind and body, and you will not find it. If you were, for example, to go to the edge of a high cliff, in your fear, you would think, I might fall. I might fall. You might have had this experience, bushwalking. I don't know. I've had a similar experience where I was with a friend who was driving a car down to a farm in Gippsland, and he went to sleep at the wheel, unbeknownst to me. I was the passenger. And the car, because he'd lost control of the wheel, suddenly hurled towards the pylon, a concrete pylon of a bridge. And it was all happening in a flash. And at that moment, I had this experience, oh! That's as far as I got, because it was such an emergency. And just to backtrack, the jolt of the car going off, leaving the road, was enough to wake him up, and it was, whoa, whoa, and we're back on the road again. I've never forgotten that moment, because that is what Pabonka's talking about. So he says, if, for example, you go to the edge of a cliff, you, in your fear, you would think, I might fall, not that my body might fall or my mind might fall. The body and the mind in this moment are inseparable, like a mixture of milk and water. The self-evident I, which is the thing that might fall over the cliff, will arise on top of the body and mind. This is it. And then he gives some illustrations, and these are incredibly powerful. He says, likewise, when you go for a gallop on a horse, you do not mean the horse's mind or body when you say horse. Horse is not merely a name, according to this wrong view. Horse is not merely a name imputed on the set of both of them. You apprehend the horse to be a self-evident thing covered by the term horse. This is really, really important. You apprehend the horse to be a self-evident thing, like the snake in the grass, covered by the term horse. When you speak of Drepung or Sarah, you are not distinguishing between the external buildings, such as the main temples, and the monks, etc., who are inside. The base of imputation, Drepung, is a collection of the physical environments of these monasteries, together with their contents. Over, prepositional over this collection will arise the self-evident thing equal in size and extent to Drepung and Sarah. It is it. This is the object of negation. This is fascinating, because if I know that that's a Buddhist temple over there, I impute Buddhist temple to the collection of parts, and then my innate self-grasping mind seizes the appearance of a temple covering exactly that base that was the base of my imputation. And it is that that appears back from its own side. Now, the reason I'm giving that example, if I don't know that's a temple, I'll see a building there, merely imputed by my mind, appearing back as an inherently existent building. I will not see an inherently existent temple because I have not imputed an inherent a temple to there. See what we're getting at here? And so we impute things left, right, and center, and then we grasp at them as existing in that way, according to the measure or the inflection, if you like, or even the flavor of our imputation. And that is why we're in such deep shit. Because if I'm angry and I impute horrible person over there, you appear from your side as horrible, as I was describing before. On the other hand, if I forgive you because you gave me a present the next day and you're now lovable. The same object, ostensibly, same person, is now appearing as inherently lovable. If you were inherently lovable or inherently horrible, you'd be two entirely contradictory things, two natures. You can't be that. Yet, the innate self-grasping mind is not logical. It is capable of working over all the cracks. And this is really, really valuable to know because it proposes the essential value in developing analysis. So Pabonka finishes that very, very important passage with a summary. He says, in short, as Ketsang Jamyang Monlam says, any and every phenomena is said to be this or that. This or that, equal in size and extent to the basis of imputation, presents itself. This is the ultimate object of refutation by logic. It has been described as the thing to which you direct your grasping at true existence, or as the object of negation that is supposed to be established as true when one does not recognize that it only appears to be true. So Lama Zopa Rinpoche often quotes this passage by Ketsang Jamyang Monlam to make the point that we're seeing the object of refutation all around us all the time. And so this is a very important point for an meditation instruction, because if we're looking for an object of refutation, which is the product of an intellectually contrived notion of the object of refutation, we'll be missing the opportunity of identifying the actual way in which it appears. So does this mean that the self, I have to go a few minutes longer, is that all right, Stephen? We have to then at this point, of course, draw back and say, does this mean that the self, the I, doesn't exist? Not at all. It's that it doesn't exist in the way that ignorance projects and grasps at. So I'm now returning to that earlier question that I raised, where Lama Tsongkhapa is saying that the way in which we impute a snake to a rope is exactly the same as the way we impute an I to the aggregates. And you should be protesting, going, but that snake doesn't exist, but the I does. So what are you talking about, Tsongkhapa? You muddle things. So we need to distinguish very precisely between the way a snake on a rope is to be distinguished from a snake designated independence on the parts of a snake, the bones and flesh and so forth, because their existential status is different. Tsongkhapa says, now, insofar as the way the vase and so on, he's giving an example of a vase, so on, are conceptually posited, they are in that respect at least exactly similar to the snake imputed on the basis of the rope. However, between the vase and so on the one hand, and the snake rope on the other, the two cases are entirely different when it comes to whether they exist, whether they are capable of effective functions, and so on. So this is a topic that I can't really go into more than that, but what we're saying here is that a third party can come along and say, look, that wasn't a snake, it was a rope. And I can go back and go, oh, hey, yeah, you're right. It's a hose, it's a rope. And that means that I've invalidated the snake in the grass being real. That's good. But if I was to invalidate the existence of a snake merely imputed to the legitimate, if you like, workable parts of a snake that can function as a snake because it's been appropriately designated to those parts, then I'm in danger of getting bitten. It's absolutely sensible that we make this distinction, but the distinction itself isn't anchored in a real pre-existing nature of those things, because such a thing does not exist, remember. So it's a very, very interesting point. So there's a clear distinction between between the two in terms of whether their conventions remain essential for everyday transaction. So just taking that one briefly, the letter A only works as the letter A in dependence on a consort, a chorus, if you like, of further agreements being arrived at consensually by a community. And we've all agreed within an English sort of phoneme system, in this case, that this mark will function as a letter A. If we all agree that that's the case and it works successfully within our system, then it is the letter A. It's merely nominally the letter A, but that's all the letter A ever is. Because as we said before, it couldn't be found in its parts. It can't be found separately from its parts. It can't be there covering its space of designation. So the other part of that is whether the usage of such conventions is susceptible to invalidation. So I gave that example before. If I misread the letter A to be the letter P, then not only will my ability to read be jeopardized, but I'll be corrected by my English teacher. And all that takes place within our convention only. That everyday transactions remain tenable in this world, posited through conceptualization, represents among the commentators of the words and meanings of the Majjhimika texts, and this is Tsongkhapa talking here, explaining, a unique tradition of interpreting the noble Nagarjuna and his son by the three masters, Buddhapalita, Shantideva, and the master Chandrakirti. And then he qualifies, and this is really good to think about, the issue, he says, of how everyday transactions remain possible in the world, posited through conception, is indeed the most difficult point of the final view of the middle way. Understood thus, he says, then, as the precious Garland states, nothing whatsoever, not even the mere names, exist on an ultimate level. And so on the conventional level also, nothing exists other than what is posited as mere designation through conventions such as names. So I'll finish in a few minutes. I think I've got to a good point really to finish, but at least for now. So Tsongkhapa summarizes in a very, very valuable way at this point. He says, if one understands well, one will soundly comprehend first how phenomena are necessarily produced through dependence. Secondly, how by the very virtue of their being dependently designated and having arisen through dependence, they have no existence in their own right. Thirdly, how they do not possess an independent nature, something not posited through the power of other conventions. And fourth point, no matter the phenomena, when it is posited as existent, it is done so without analysis, without seeking a true referent behind the designation. So this last point is very subtle, and it refers to the fact that conventional reality is accepted, or acceptable, if you like, at the level of conventional truth, that is, in terms of ordinary, everyday, valid transactions. When we refer to a vase, such as wash the vase so they can put flowers in it, we are not investigating whether or not the vase exists as inherently existent or otherwise. We simply accept in ordinary, everyday ways that the vase is over there on the table and needs to be cleaned. We don't need, in this situation, to involve ourselves in philosophical analysis at this ordinary, everyday level of human transaction with the world. And in any case, and this is another pitfall for Western students, if we do seek, we decide, oh no, I'm not happy with that, I'm going to look for the true referent behind the designation, the real vase that's been referred to by the name and conception vase, we won't find one. Why? Because these things designated by conception and name or label do not truly exist. And so many scholars, when they've investigated to find the nature of the cup, is the nature of the cup here, and they pull the cup to pieces in terms of parts, they can't find the cup anywhere, and then they conclude that there's no cup here. And this is taken by Tsongkhapa not to be proof that cups don't exist, but that there is no purpose in using a conventional, applying an ultimate, what's called an ultimate analysis, investigating the final mode of existence of things in a conventional context, because conventionalities are accepted as merely what are imputed by thought. There's nothing more to them than that in reality. So if we go searching for them here, we're not going to find them because they're merely nominated by thought. So we know that because we've applied ultimate analysis in our meditation. But in our everyday transaction, when we've got up off our cushion, we go, oh, I'd love a cup of tea. That's fine. So we're not contradicting the functionality of conventional things. So if we mistake this non-findability to mean that the object designated does not exist at all, we are falling into a very serious conceptual trap, which is called nihilism. And it's for this reason that His Holiness thoroughly and consistently, emphatically teaches dependent origination, the meaning of dependent origination, at the beginning of any presentation of emptiness to Western audiences. So you'll recall that based on this wise strategy, I also attempted to introduce how things exist dependent arising in earlier sessions. And I used the example of the lack of inherent existence of self and other. Self and other exist in mutual dependence, just like high and low. And as Nagarjuna says in Precious Garland, when there is long, there has to be short. They do not exist through their own nature. But there is long and short. I walk into a room and you're the tallest in that relative context. If you're inherently the tallest and you left the room and entered a world of giants, you'd still be the tallest because that's your nature. So anyway, so Nagarjuna says in Precious Garland, through what is emptiness known? It is known through seeing dependent arising. Buddha, the supreme knower of reality, said, what is dependently produced is not inherently existent. So we might finish there for today anyway. This has a very direct pertinence to the verse from the text. It was 103, wasn't it? Because it's talking about the self of person and the importance of realizing selflessness. So I've approached that through the example of the snake and then jumped to the eye. So it's very much on the point there. So I'll ask Stephen now to kindly lead the prayers. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Dedication prayers. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings, without exception, into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Long life prayers for His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world. To the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. Kyabje Lama Zopa Rinpoche, you who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. And Tenzin Oselhita, Venerable One, to you whose kindness exceeds that of all the conquerors, for those wanderers in far-off places, especially the West, mindful of your loving concern for us in intentionally descending again into a family of a far distant land, we make this request. O Lama, please, please live long.
And I might add Gendoga's here. You with an immutable vow to spread to the limits of space the Dharma of the able one in general and the Dharma of the pure-minded conqueror, supreme superior spiritual friend of unrepayable kindness, please remain for hundreds of eons and bestow the supreme and common siddhis. So I've taken up some of your discussion time. There's only one way, was to jump in the deep end, I think.
Sure.
And so I am going to attempt to, well, I will actually finish the verses, even if it involves reading them, but there's plenty to pick up, but we've got a really good basis. But I did want to look in more detail next week into the manner of investigating the I, doing the analysis of the I. So I've already introduced the importance and the way of identifying the object of negation, which is the first step in that meditation. So I've provided the ground for that discussion. So are there any questions or observations you'd like to make? Yeah, thank you. Doris.
I just have to say that was a beautiful presentation. The way that you wove things together, like, I mean, I've been hearing these things randomly for quite a while, but you just pulled it together with like really beautiful passages and quotes. And thank you very much.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm passionate about it.
and your way of reading it and saying, and here's the crunch, like, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. But it just shows you the delight of study, doesn't it, as well? It is so rich. And we now have such extraordinary translations appearing. It's a great privilege, really. So thank you for your comments. And as I said, was trying to put forward things that I've sort of put together myself over a long time to sort of make my understanding somehow at least coherent. And so I was sharing those with you because it can be a great shortcut, actually. It can cut a lot of stuff away. And also I delight in quoting from the key text because it's not only are they so powerful in their own right, but it also secures any fraudulent interpretations on my part. And this is such a serious topic. We can't afford to be making those mistakes. And so if for some reason we're generating a wrong view, spending some time with the text will quickly sort that out, as will spending time with our precious teachers. So I really respect and admire the fact that you've hung in over these sessions for so long, because it's a very hard-hitting text, and there's probably times where you get a little bit grumpy, say, oh no, not the self-cherishing bit again, here we go, and sure enough, here we go. So I'm trying to knit that together too, self-cherishing and self-grasping. We need to work on both. So thank you very much. With regards to the exam, I did get feedback from Stephen. I'm happy for an open book exam, so I'm going to be working on that basis. I'm going to write the exam when the last session's finished, because I just want to make sure I'm dealing with the content that was actually given. And it's going to be in the form of a small handful of questions that will require some care putting together an answer. But if you do want to quote from other texts, which I'm perfectly happy with, do acknowledge those quotations with a footnote or a reference, because that just supports the source of that, and it's very valuable for me as well. And so to Dani and Nancy too, it's been delightful that you've been attending the session. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.
Not forgotten, Dani, and not forgotten, Nancy.
Thank you so much.